What's up, everybody? Natalie here. I'm with Allied Scholars for Animal Protection at UT Austin, and I had a sign that said, "Give me your best arguments for not being vegan." And Alan very kindly agreed to sit down and have a chat. Let's go right into it. What are your arguments for not being vegan?
So, first of all, thanks for having me on. I think it's good that you guys are open to outside perspectives. I'm coming from a perspective where I was vegetarian throughout much of my childhood for religious reasons. And so gradually I've moved away from that into eating white meats. I don't eat red meats. And so coming from that perspective of like a religious vegetarianism moving towards eating meat. So what I believe is that while I love animals and that I think that they're amazing creatures just like humans, I think that placing humans with a unique responsibility to be vegan is ultimately anthropocentric, and that in turn denies the human body's natural necessity to gain some of the critical nutrients which can only be naturally derived from meat sources.
So basically the argument you're making is that we need animal products in order to be like healthy?
Yes, they don't necessarily have to be from animals. They definitely don't have to involve animal cruelty. So one thing that I'm against is, factory farming, really the kind of inhumane ways that animal breeding has turned into. I'm against that. And I don't believe that meat should be as big of a part of the, for example, American diet as it is currently. There are many cultures that eat meat in moderation, which have a much lower carbon impact to the environment, while still getting those crucial animal nutrients which are necessary.
So what are these nutrients that can only be found in animal products? I'm curious.
Sure. So of course there's supplements that have been made in recent times to, combat these kinds of deficiencies, but B12 is one very big nutrient which
Where does it come from originally?
I'm not totally informed on that. So when I was vegetarian for many years, I had a B12 deficiency and I had to take supplements.
Yeah.
And I was explained to by physicians that the B12 deficiency was due to a lack of meat consumption because there was some metabolic process happening within the animal meat where humans are unable to synthesize B12, and we need to gain the precursor from animal meat sources.
Yeah. Sure. So a lot of doctors, especially, however long ago this was, aren't quite as well versed in nutrition as some of us may be. So B12 actually comes from soil. It comes from dirt. So the reason that we're not getting B12 in our diet is because all the fruits and vegetables are sanitized so much. And the animals that people eat are supplemented with cobalt or B12 before people eat them. So even if you're getting B12 from an animal source, that's still coming from a supplement. If you're going to make the argument with B12, it doesn't hold up because it doesn't even originally come from animal sources.
But, on the contrary, do you believe that it's better to not sanitize your fruits and vegetables?
No, I don't have this, you're talking about, what's natural, this kind of, natural, you're against supplementation. I don't necessarily think that makes sense in our modern society because, first of all, we've been supplementing things for a long time, like iodine is in salt because humans weren't getting enough iodine, so they said, let's add it to salt. There's fluoride in water, which some people disagree with, but it's still added to water. There's fortified foods. Supplementation has been added to our food supply for you and me for our entire life. So I think it's kind of a shaky argument against veganism because that would really be an argument against all of our food. The animals are all supplemented as well. So it's not a problem that's specific to veganism, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I understand your point.
Yeah.
I think at the same time, have you considered that I'm not necessarily for the current system of farming that supplements
Yeah, you said
everything.
that. You said,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So I'm not necessarily for the current system of, supplementation of everything. I think that definitely meat should not be emphasized as much as it is in the American diet because it does lead to a lot of unnecessary cruelty towards animals. At the same time, there's also the issue of protein availability, which I think as a nutritionist, I'm sure you're informed about, that there is no protein source, including soy proteins and whey proteins, that are as protein available in all of your critical amino acids.
That's not true. Soy has all 9 essential amino acids.
To the same equal ratio that animal protein.
I'm not sure, but that's not necessarily relevant because you would have to show evidence that, if someone has, let's say, valine or leucine or isoleucine, a deficiency, all those amino acids are in soy, first of all. So if you were to come to me and be like, oh, vegans are deficient in leucine, I would want to see evidence for that. As of right now, no evidence for that exists.
I mean, is that more because of lack of experimentation, lack of study, or because there is no leucine deficiency?
I think it's because there's no leucine deficiency. But let's kind of bring this back to animals. So could we agree that humans do not need to consume animals or animal products to survive and thrive in our current system?
Survive, I agree.
Thrive.
Not necessarily. Okay. Again, due to issues like protein availability, and I think we have to agree to disagree on the fact that you believe that there is no leucine deficiency. I just believe that the situation has not been thoroughly studied enough. In places like India, where large proportions of the population are wholly vegetarian,
right?
There is linking. There have been studies showing links to stunting and malnutrition.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the vegetarian diet is horrific. Dairy is terrible for people. Eggs are not good. I would never advocate for vegetarianism.
They don't even eat eggs. Okay. A lot of them don't even eat eggs.
Dairy's really bad. So I think that if there's problems with like health in India, I think it's probably because of the dairy more than the fact that they're not eating meat. What about Olympic athletes, who are vegan? Clearly they're thriving. They're winning medals. They're NFL players who are playing at the highest level who are vegan. So if they can survive and thrive, like, why couldn't you?
Are they surviving and thriving on on regular food sources that are available to the average American, or are they surviving and thriving on highly conditioned diets being supervised by professional dietitians?
All professional athletes at that level are doing, even if they eat meat or not, they're all getting like the best of the best. But that doesn't mean that you and me can't, as a vegan, survive and thrive with a well-planned vegan diet. And that's not me saying that. That's dietetic associations, American, Canadian, UK, Australian. They all say that well-planned vegan diets are nutritionally adequate for all stages of life. Yeah, so to me, that, there's enough evidence that shows that we don't need to be consuming these animal products. What evidence would you need to see to believe that?
I think I would need to see evidence that a well-planned vegan diet, in your words, is achievable by the vast majority of Americans without serious change to the way that food is marketed and sold in the United States. I think that additionally...
Well, what would you need to see that? Like a group of people who have done it, or what?
Let me finish. So I think that additionally, one thing that needs to be posited is that just because humans can survive and thrive without eating meat on a highly regimented and supplemented vegan diet doesn't mean necessarily that animals should completely disappear let me put it this way. Meat should completely disappear as a source of food. So the reason why I'm saying that is because lab-grown meat is increasingly looking like it may be the future of meat consumption. What's your stance as a vegan against lab-grown meat that doesn't involve harm to animals?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it'll be a game changer for the animals. Personally, I don't really care that much about eating it because I'm very happy with a plant-based diet. And I just kind of want to go back to, like, you seem to think it's hard for people to have like a well-planned vegan diet. I can promise you it's not. I'm like the laziest person in the world, and I managed to do it, and so do so many people. So it's not like it's this crazy, inaccessible thing. So that's the point I want to make. But I kind of want to bring this back to morality. At the beginning, you kind of said something about like humans being superior, like in terms of intelligence and whatnot.
I said you shouldn't. Vegans unnecessarily place humans as though they have a moral burden to care for all other animals, when in reality we are just another animal.
Okay. So you're saying that because humans are animals, we can therefore behave the same way that animals behave?
Rather, I believe that our dietary choices, the human diet, for example, is not built for the vegan diet as, say, a cow is. A cow, they've got 4 stomachs. They have the ability to break down cellulose, and they have the ability to extract as much nutrition as possible, much more than the human gut can. The human gut is much closer to that of, say, a dog or or a bear. Omnivores and carnivores. We have canines.
Right. So we are biologically omnivores. Vegans accept that premise. Generally, omnivore by default means you can survive either on all meat, either on all plants, or on both. We're really opportunistic eaters. The definition of omnivore includes only eating plants that we can survive on that. So, do you think that our biological makeup, does that justify harming others when we don't need to, in the same way that, I have the ability to go punch and kick people, but that doesn't justify it just because I'm biologically able to?
Now you're saying that, now you're twisting the fact.
I'm testing the principle.
Okay, yeah. Fine.
Yeah.
So violence, right? I believe there's two kinds of violence. There's obligate violence and there's inobligate violence. And so when you say punching and kicking people, you are not withdrawing a physical benefit from that. For example, nutrition.
But we don't need to be consuming animals, so it's not an obligate violence. We're being violent for them. We're being violent to them because we want to.
No, I disagree. So right now, with you said you're the most lazy person and you still follow a vegan diet. Yet you mentioned before you're a dietitian, which means...
No, I didn't say I was a dietitian. I said I know a lot about nutrition.
Okay. Now, one, do Americans on average know a lot about nutrition? So two, what would it take in terms of policy in order to get them up to that speed? And three, ultimately, would bringing animals out of the American meat supply be an overall detriment to American nutrition on par with, say, what's happening in India right now, where people are right on a debate on whether or not to even add eggs and dairy to the midday meal because, there's a religious fight against it. There's a religious argument against it. The physiological argument is that it has been linked to stunting due to not getting enough protein in the diet.
Right. Yeah, I can't really comment on the situation in India because I'm unfamiliar with it. But in terms of the U.S., meat has been linked to heart disease over and over again. Heart disease is our biggest killer. So it would actually be beneficial to our health to prioritize more plant foods. The healthiest populations, they're called the blue zones, right? Like the Okinawan's. They're about 97% plant-based. But I feel like we're talking about veganism here in terms of diet, where I'm kind of more coming from the ethical position. So why don't I just kind of define what I mean by veganism? So by veganism, I mean that we should try to exclude animal cruelty as far as practicable and possible. Or you could look at it from a rights violation perspective. We shouldn't violate the rights of animals when we don't need to. What do you think about those kind of arguments?
I think that I don't have too big of an argument against that. I think that while you're saying that we don't need to violate the rights of animals when we don't need to, ultimately, in cases for what the average American can afford right now, for the most part, it's going to be an equal amount of access to both fruits and vegetables, especially for high quality fruits and vegetables. I think as a university student, living on a limited budget, I can speak for many people to say that getting access to high quality fresh fruits and vegetables is a struggle for many Americans.
Absolutely, and I understand that. I'm not going to disagree with that. I think the thing I would disagree with, which I think you're implying, although I do want to check, so do you think that veganism is more expensive? Is that what you're saying?
I think that getting, again, a well-planned vegan diet and high-quality fresh fruits and vegetables is not possible in the status quo.
Sure. And, okay. I want to separate the high-quality fruits and vegetables from just veganism in general. The study came out of Oxford last year. It showed that vegan diets are 30% cheaper in Western countries where we are. So it's not more expensive at all. That's something a lot of people think. But the cheapest foods that are naturally vegan, beans, rice, potatoes, when you track GDP, when it goes up, meat consumption goes up as well. So there's almost an inverse relationship. So if you are concerned about cost, which I think is a valid concern, veganism actually comes out a lot better than omnivore diets. If we're talking about accessibility, I think a lot of people don't realize how accessible it is. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago and he said that on his college campus there were no vegan options. I looked online, every single dining hall had 2 or 3 options for every meal. So it's almost one of those things you kind of have to look for, but when you do, you're gonna see it everywhere, right? But let's say, kind of for the sake of this discussion, I'm not going to make the claim that everyone in the world can go vegan, right? In the same way that not everyone in the world can wash their hands, not everyone in the world can drive a car, right? But does that really have anything to do with what you and I do? Do you think you personally could go vegan? You have the means to?
I think that ultimately, I have a lot of cultural ties to vegetarianism rather than veganism. So I don't think I could go vegan. I regularly, whenever I go home, I only eat vegetarian food.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is purely plant-based with some dairy and eggs as well. I think that ultimately, meat eaters shouldn't try to impose on vegans, and vegans shouldn't try to impose on meat eaters either. I think that in both cases, we should have dialogues like this.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think that's a good point, is that, vegans shouldn't impose. I can't actually impose on you. I can't force you to go vegan. I can't force anyone here to go vegan. But every time you buy these animal products, you are forcing that animal into a slaughterhouse. You're forcing them into these bad conditions.
Did I force them, or did market conditions force them because there's an overall demand for the product?
It's a mix of both, right? But do you think individual actions, like supply and demand, right? So when you buy, say, a burger, right, then they're going to produce more burgers because supply and demand. So you acknowledge that individuals do have some responsibility in this regard?
I think that reducing it from the group to the individual ultimately takes away the overall wishes of the group itself. I'm personally coming from, I guess, a more left-wing kind of perspective on this. So from my perspective, I have an overall focus on the work of groups in influencing public policy. And part of public policy is what we eat, right?
And that's something vegans are certainly working on. We have lobbyists, we have people in certain groups. We like to focus on both because at the end of the day, I like to use smoking as an example, right? Like, let's say it was 1950s and someone was like, we need to ban smoking from this building. There's no way it would have happened. But then once these campaigns came out, like, oh, tobacco's bad, like individuals should stop smoking, talk to your kids about it, then those laws became enacted. I see the same thing happening with animal agriculture. If the government were trying to change stuff right now, people would freak out because there's not necessarily enough individual support. So that's why I think activism should include individuals and groups. But I kind of want to talk about some of the more leftist stuff. So correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't leftists pretty anti-hierarchy?
Yeah, I would disagree that leftists are. I would
I'm
disagree.
sure there's variance
Yeah.
among the leftists. Okay.
Well, leftists are generally anti-hierarchy. There is an agreement that in the short term, while building towards a better society, that hierarchy is a natural part of our evolution to a world without hierarchy. So
Sure. In the sense that people have to feel some cultural identity to fight for that culture to have a better system.
rather than working class,
Right.
So I think that ultimately I think we're going off topic with the
I think I can bring
politics
it back,
stuff. Sure. So I think that ultimately the way that this ties into, whether to be vegan or not vegan is that the overall American, people, they're not convinced of veganism yet. That can change. I think that it's more likely that the group continues to have similar wants and needs and that it's instead served by different sources. Like, for example, plant-based meat, I actually bought a lot of plant-based meat. It's not bad. I actually quite enjoy it. And likewise, lab-grown meat, I think that's when that exists. It's already actually coming out in Israel. They've already released a burger out with it.
Too.
In Singapore, yeah, exactly.
It's not scalable yet, but certainly will be.
It's growing, right? Every growing industry has its start. Plant-based meat just a few years ago, everyone was saying it's not scalable. And look at where we are now. So it's going to be more likely that the people continue to maintain their perspective. Again, that may change.
Yeah.
And that veganism is just something that hasn't caught on.
I guess I kind of want to tie this to the hierarchy thing that I brought up. So, I think we can agree that discrimination based on race and gender is wrong, right? But then, have you heard the term speciesism?
Yeah, I have.
Sure. Discrimination based on different species. So, why is that okay? Don't you think species is arbitrary as well? Because they don't choose the body they're born into.
Now, here's the thing, right? So when it comes to left-wing, thought and praxis, is ultimately within the realm of humans because we're operating within political systems for our species. The biological fact is that humans have been set up just like any other animal in opposition to other species. Let me explain this. So,
I understand that point, but I'm going to say we've been set up in opposition to other groups of humans as well, but that doesn't justify discrimination.
It's not a biological opposition.
Tribalism is.
The thing is, so tribalism is a psychological opposition.
Yeah.
So it's been shown in studies. I don't have any exact ones, but I've done a lot of reading for when I was studying for MCAT. I'm pre-med. So tribalism itself is a psychological learned behavior rather than an innate behavior, for example, eating meat. I
disagree that eating meat is an innate behavior because you were raised not eating meat, right? A lot of people are raised that way as well. Whereas we learn in the U.S. to eat meat. We learn to discriminate against chickens and cows and pigs, but not against dogs and cats.
I think that when I meant eating meat is a learned behavior, I rather meant eating opportunistically. Eating opportunistically is innate.
Gotcha.
So,
but not in our current society, though. We can agree that eating meat is learned.
Society has encouraged a learning of meat over dependence. I think we can agree, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we can agree that Americans eat too much meat, definitely too much red meat that causes a lot of heart disease and also other diseases, and that needs to be scaled down.
Sure, but I like to go further because, let's say, in the U.S., right, we kill 10 billion animals per year just in the U.S. Let's say we got it down to 3 billion. What about those 3 billion? Shouldn't they have a say in whether or not they're being killed? Like, should we take their rights into account?
I guess my question would be, would you ask, for example, a bear, would you ask a bear whether or not the right of the fish that it's catching from the river should be taken into account?
No, I can't talk to bears yet. Maybe
Exactly.
maybe when I hit like 1,000 level vegan, I'll be able to talk to bears. But that's why I talk to humans, because you mentioned earlier kind of that we're smarter, more intelligent. Oh, you didn't. You said that vegans are wrong because they hold humans to a different moral standard. I think that's totally valid. I think we should be held to a different moral standard. Animals rape each other. We don't want humans to rape each other. We live in a society where we have laws and stuff like that. And I think that's beneficial. In the same way, I would like for us to consider morality in a way that bears can't. Bears also have a necessity, whereas we don't.
Bears are omnivores.
They are.
They are.
Yeah.
And yet they still choose to eat meat.
Sure, they do. But once again, if they had the same access to plant foods that we have and it was just given to them, they would probably take what was easiest to get.
They live in the forest, and bears can eat.
Yeah, I understand about bears. I'm saying we're not bears.
I think you continued the analogy, though, on the assumption that bears...
Oh, no, I was kind of creating a hypothetical, like if bears lived in our society and it was easier, like if people were giving them plant-based foods, I don't think they would go out and hunt because they're lazy. But I feel like that's totally off topic. So if you found out that you could survive and thrive on a plant-based diet, then would you do it? Fully plant-based, not this reducitarian thing.
Sure. I think that right now, I don't think that I have evidence that on my budget, I guess, accessibility to these kinds of high-quality foods that are necessary. Because as you mentioned, a lot of foods are sanitized that removes vital nutrients like B12. So I think that while I don't have access to it right now, if I do in the future, I'll consider it.
Yeah, I would love to give you resources and information and show you that you probably have more access than you think, and that the nutrition science is there, and it's more and more stuff comes out in support of veganism every year, and more stuff comes out about meat. The last thing I want to touch on is you said you only eat white meat, so I assume that's chicken and fish. The moral problem there, right, is that say you were to eat, a burger, that's like 1/1000th of a cow. But if you eat chicken, it actually takes 200 chickens to equal the meat of one cow. So if suffering is your concern in any way, then it doesn't make sense to go for the smaller animals, because then you're harming more individuals.
So the thing is, I don't make meat a critical part of my diet. I'm still largely vegetarian. So I eat it mostly just for the protein intake quality. And I supplement that with soy protein, and I supplement that with whey protein.
We haven't talked about dairy. Are you aware of the dairy industry?
I'm aware that there are many abusive practices. Again, I think I came into this conversation from the outset with the stance that I don't believe in inhumane treatment of animals in life, and I don't think that the American factories farming system is proper. However, I just don't think that the detriment to the animals outweighs the positive side for the humans.
Oh, okay. That's definitely something that I disagree with, and I'll give you more resources on that, because I feel like we've been talking for almost 30 minutes. So I think you got to get to class soon anyway. But yeah, I really appreciated this, and thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this and want to help me do activism full-time while getting exclusive content, join my Patreon today. Special thanks to my morally superior patrons, Amy and Andy.